Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going straight into the very high-stakes world of global diplomacy.
We are. We're talking about the Munich Security Conference.
Exactly. And, you know, when you hear a security conference, I think for a lot of people, their eyes might glaze over a bit.
Right. Suits, podiums, a lot of handshakes.
But you have to remember, this is where the future of global security is really being debated. This is the room where it happens.
It's often called the Davos of defense for a reason. It's where the mask, it comes off a little. And leaders tell each other what they're actually thinking.
But for today's deep dive, we're doing something a little bit different. We're putting a twist on it.
Uh-huh.
We're not just going to analyze the geopolitics, though we will. We're going to treat this as a kind of masterclass in how to read the news.
I love this angle.
Yeah.
Because to really understand what happened in Munich, you have to get the language.
Yeah.
You have to unpick, which is a great British term, the arguments.
Unpick. I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, you have to unpick the vocabulary, the idioms that these world leaders are using to persuade or to warn or sometimes, even to threaten each other.
Exactly. So our source material for this is centered on a BBC News broadcast. And it featured some real heavy hitters.
It did. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, US Senator Marco Rubio.
And, maybe most importantly, the former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen.
Right. And if you listen to all of them, there was one word that just kept coming up. It was sort of the watchword for the whole conference.
It really was.
And that word is unity.
Unity. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? Everybody agrees. But what you find when you dig into the sources is that everyone is using that word to mean something just a little bit different.
And that's where the real story is.
Exactly. That's where the tension is.
Okay, so let's get into it. Segment 1. The vocabulary of unity. And we have to start with President Zelensky. He gave a speech that really set the tone.
He really did. He didn't just stand up and say, we all need to be friends.
Yeah.
He used a very specific, very powerful military metaphor.
He called unity the best weapon.
The best weapon and also the best interceptor against Russian aggression, which is just a fascinating choice of words.
An interceptor, like a missile that shoots down another missile.
Precisely. So he's arguing that political cohesion, just the act of staying together, is as physically important as, the actual hardware, the tanks and the planes.
And the BBC host, Kazi Madera, she noted that other leaders really picked up on this. She said that Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, echoed Zelensky's sentiment.
Right. And for anyone listening who wants to sharpen their media literacy, echo is such a great verb to flag.
Why is that?
Because in news reporting, it doesn't just mean repeated. It means to resonate with something, to amplify it.
Yeah.
So when Starmer echoes Zelensky, he's signaling that the UK isn't just listening.
They're on the same frequency.
They're on the same frequency.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And speaking of that, we also heard from Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission. She had a couple of really interesting phrases.
She did. She said Europe needs to pull up its sleeves and gel together.
Okay, let's break those down. Pull up your sleeves.
That's a classic idiom. It basically means the time for talking is over, and now it's time for the hard physical work to begin. It's a shift from, say, diplomacy to industry.
And what about gel? That's a curious one. Gel together.
I really like that one. Think about it like hair gel or maybe glue. You have all these different diverse parts, different countries, different priorities, and for them to become a solid whole, they need to set. They need to gel.
So it's a visual way of describing unity.
It is. And it implies that right now, maybe Europe is still a bit liquid, a bit unformed.
Which brings us to the UK. Keir Starmer was trying really hard to show that Britain is ready to gel with Europe even after Brexit.
He was. He explicitly said the UK is no longer a Brexit nation. And he used this phrase, he said they are leaning into the relationship.
Leaning into, it's a very active phrase.
Very active. It means you're embracing something, a challenge or a relationship, not pulling away from it. And here's a great tip for analyzing the news.
Yeah.
Always look for the concrete action behind the pretty words.
So he didn't just say, we're leaning in.
No. He announced something. What did he announce?
He announced he was deploying a carrier strike group to the North Atlantic.
Boom. There it is. That's the concrete action. So when you hear a politician say leaning in, you should always be looking for the aircraft carrier that proves it.
So on the surface, everyone is talking about unity. But there was a massive elephant in the room.
Or maybe the elephant not quite in the room.
The United States.
The United States.
Which brings us to segment 2. Reading between the lines. Everyone at that conference was watching the U.S. delegation, especially Senator Marco Rubio, just incredibly closely.
They were. And the source text used the perfect idiom for this. They said everyone was waiting with bated breath.
With bated breath, meaning like holding your breath in anxiety or excitement?
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, just a quick note for the English learners out there. It's spelled B-A-T-E-D. It comes from abated, which means stopped or held.
Right, not B-A-I-T-E-D, like a fishing hook.
You see that mistake all the time. But yeah, they're holding their breath. Why? Because the year before, Senator J.D. Vance came and was, let's just say, very explosive.
But Rubio was different. His approach was much more subtle.
And this is where that media literacy skill comes in again.
Yeah.
You have to distinguish between the tone and the message.
Okay.
The sources all note that Rubio's tone was conciliatory. He wasn't yelling, he was making jokes. But the message underneath was still deeply critical.
The old iron fist in a velvet glove.
Precisely. His underlying message, when you unpick it, was that Europe might need to go it alone a bit more, that the U.S. can't be the world policeman forever.
Go it alone. That phrase implies you don't have backup.
It does. And he did something else that savvy politicians do. He implied things without saying them directly.
Like what?
Well, he criticized European borders. He never once said the words migration crisis, but by pointing at the borders, he implies that the whole issue is a failure of European policy.
So on one side, you have Zelensky and Starmer saying unity is our weapon, and on the other, you have the U.S. sort of implying,
you guys better figure this out because we have our own problems.
Ah.
Which leads directly to the harshest reality check of the whole conference.
Segment 3, the hard truth. This is where Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former NATO chief, comes in, and wow, he did not pull any punches.
He really didn't. Rasmussen looks at the big economic picture, and he basically argued that the entire old model of Europe is just dead.
The old model being? What exactly?
Like cheap energy from Russia.
Okay.
Cheap goods from China.
Right.
And cheap security from the United States.
Yeah.
He says that whole arrangement, that triad, is gone. It's over.
So what's the alternative?
He says Europe needs to move to a war footing.
Let's stop on that term, war footing. It sounds incredibly intense. What does it actually mean?
It is intense. A war footing isn't just about fighting a war. It's about moving your entire economy into a state of preparation for war.
So factories that make cars now have to make tanks?
Exactly. Or drones. It means the #1 priority of the nation shifts to defense production.
And Rasmussen's argument is that Europe has to do this.
He says they have no choice. Because of parity. He points out that Putin has already put the Russian economy on a war footing. So if Europe stays on a peace footing, they simply can't produce weapons fast enough to keep up. It's a numbers game.
But moving a whole continent's economy isn't easy. You can't just flip a switch. Rasmussen mentioned something specific that gets in the way.
Ah, yes. Red tape.
Red tape.
The enemy of speed. It just refers to all that excessive bureaucracy.
Yeah.
You know, the forms, the approvals, the committees that slow everything down. He's saying they have to cut red tape if they want to get weapons from a factory to the front line this decade.
The BBC host, when she heard this, she called it a stark idea.
Stark. That's such a good adjective. It means harsh, bare, unpleasantly clear.
And it is stark.
It's stark because he's asking countries in, say, Southern Europe, who are miles away from the Russian border, to completely change their lifestyle and their economy.
Right. How do you convince a tourist economy in the Mediterranean to adopt a war mindset?
That's the huge psychological gap he's pointing to.
And that gap seems like a real problem. If half of Europe is ready for this war footing and the other half isn't, how do you get that unity we started with?
That is the billion-dollar question. And
right.
Rasmussen actually had a proposed solution for it, which brings us to our final segment.
Segment 4, solving the deadlock. So, the problem is a divided EU. You have countries like Hungary that, as the sources note, pull more towards Putin. So how do you move forward?
Rasmussen's answer is a coalition of the willing.
A coalition of the willing. That phrase has some history to it.
It does. But in this context, it's a strategic concept. It means a core group of countries acts together without waiting for total consensus from everyone.
So breaking from the usual EU and NATO model of unanimity?
Exactly. Normally, everyone has to agree. Rasmussen is saying, look, we just don't have time for that anymore.
So if a country like Hungary says no, the rest of the group just moves on without them?
Pretty much. He used a great phrasal verb for this. He said if some countries want to opt out, then it's their business.
Opt out, to choose not to participate. It's actually quite dismissive when you think about it.
It's very dismissive. He's basically saying, fine, you can stay behind. We're moving forward. He's calling for the core countries to step up.
There's that phrasal verb again. We've heard it used for the U.S. public, for the U.K., and now for Europe. Step up.
It just means to take action, to take responsibility when it's needed. It's the total opposite of leaning back or opting out. The whole conference was really a debate between those who want to step up and those who, for whatever reason, want to opt out.
And there was one more really heavy word used by the analyst Rachel Rizzo. She was talking about Europe buying Russian oil. She said it enables the war.
Enable. Yeah. That's a word with a lot of weight.
Yeah.
In a positive context, it just means to make something possible.
But here it has a negative meaning.
A very negative connotation. In this kind of analysis, enabling means you are providing the means for bad behavior to continue.
So she's arguing that by buying the gas, Europe is financially enabling the very aggression it's trying to fight.
It's a total contradiction. You're buying the gas, which funds the missiles that you then have to build interceptors to shoot down.
And that's what makes unpicking this whole situation so incredibly complex.
Exactly.
So we've covered a lot of ground here and a lot of English. Let's do a quick recap of the toolkit we've put together for you for the learner listening.
Sounds good. We have our idioms with bated breath for that tense anticipation.
And pull up your sleeves for getting down to hard work.
We have our power verbs. Echo to show that you're on the same page. Gel for when different parts come together to form a whole.
And the heavy one, enable, for allowing bad behavior to continue.
And don't forget the phrasal verbs. Opt out, step up, and lean into.
And of course, the big concepts. War footing, red tape, and that strategic idea of a coalition of the willing.
And the word we started with, the mission for today, to unpick.
To unpick, to analyze the detailed parts of something complex. And that is really the challenge for you listening. The next time you read a complex news article, try to unpick it.
Look for those echoes. Ask yourself who is implying what, and look for the concrete action behind the leaning in.
And always ask, is the tone matching the message? That's the ultimate pro tip for reading the news like an expert.
Absolutely.
So before we go, we want to leave you with one final thought. We talked about Rasmussen's stark reality check. He's asking Europe to become a defense superpower.
And it raises a really provocative question, not just for Europe, but for all of us, really. We're used to a certain lifestyle, one built on global trade and, relative peace. Rasmussen is suggesting that era might be over.
So the question is that mindset gap just too wide?
Can a modern, comfortable society actually pivot back to a war footing before it's attacked? Or is that politically impossible in a democracy until it's already too late?
A heavy question to chew on, but that's why we do the deep dive. Thank you for listening, for stepping up, and for unpicking the world with us.
See you next time.
喜欢这种学习方式，欢迎订阅我的频道，让我们一起用下一个10分钟，把商业英文变简单。